Usually when you talk about like bypassing alarms or picking physical locks and walking out of a highly secure facility with their most sensitive data, there is a very binary expectation there.
Yeah, you break in, you get caught, you go to prison.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's fundamentally a crime in almost every context.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking about trespassing, theft, unauthorized access to computer systems, and that carries massive federal penalties.
But then, you step into the world of penetration testing, and that entire paradigm just completely flips upside down.
It really does.
Breaking and entering both digitally and physically isn't just accepted. It's like your literal job description. You are being hired to be the absolute worst nightmare for a company's IT department.
It's sanctioned chaos.
Yeah.
But, that chaos operates inside a very strict, highly regulated framework.
Right.
The line between a highly paid security professional and, well, a cybercriminal is incredibly thin.
Yeah.
And understanding exactly where that line is drawn is really the foundation of the entire industry.
Which is exactly why we are zeroing in on a very specific mission today for this deep dive. We are doing a complete tactical breakdown of the CompTIA PenTest plus PT0-003 exam.
Oh, it's a beast of an exam.
It really is. I was reading through this massive, highly curated master study compilation by Charlotte Pan Salcedo, along with the official syllabus and some specific tool belt cheat sheets we have, and it just struck me how overwhelming this field can be.
Yeah, because there is always a new vulnerability, right? A new zero-day exploit, a new tool to learn.
Exactly. And the noise in cybersecurity is just deafening.
It is. And if you try to learn everything, you will fail this exam. I mean, to pass, you have to ruthlessly narrow your focus to the underlying methodologies that CompTIA actually tests you on.
And the stakes are very real for you, the listener. We're talking about a $404 exam in the U.S.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
No. If you fail, that money is just gone.
Yeah.
So whether you are, actively cramming to pass this test the very first time with the highest possible score, or you just want to understand how elite red teamers think, we are mapping out the entire battlefield today.
We are looking at exactly what will be on the test and how to flawlessly execute a passing strategy.
Right. So I think the best place to start is understanding what the PT0-003 actually represents in the industry, right?
Yeah, definitely. So the PenTest Plus is a vendor-neutral certification. It sits right at the intermediate level.
Yeah, so intermediate.
Right. CompTIA expects the person taking this test to already have foundational networking and security knowledge. That's usually represented by having, the Network Plus and Security Plus certification.
So you're not coming in cold.
Not at all. They also expect 3 to 4 years of actual hands-on experience in the field.
Meaning they aren't going to hold your hand and ask, what an IP address is.
Oh, definitely not. They want to know if you can actually break into the server holding that IP address.
And being vendor neutral means you aren't just memorizing where to click in a proprietary Cisco dashboard, right? Or like a Microsoft Azure portal.
Exactly. You are learning the raw underlying mechanics of the attacks themselves, regardless of the brand of the firewall.
Got it.
The exam is really testing network resiliency. Can a network withstand a concentrated professional attack?
And can you, as the tester, identify those flaws before a real threat actor does?
Yes. And to evaluate that, CompTIA divides the exam into 5 distinct domains. And honestly, the weighting of these domains is essentially a neon sign pointing to where you need to spend your study time.
I actually have the breakdown right here. So domain 1 is engagement management, which is 13% of the exam.
Right.
Domain 2 is reconnaissance and enumeration at 21%. Domain 3 is vulnerability discovery and analysis, making up 17%.
And then we hit the absolute monster at the test.
Yeah, domain 4. Attacks and exports. It is a massive 35% of the exam.
It's huge. Over a third of your score hinges on just this one section.
And then domain 5, post-exploitation and lateral movement, makes up the rest, which is kind of woven into the other concepts.
Yeah, that 35% waiting for attacks and exploits, that is CompTIA making a very loud intentional statement.
Which is what?
That you cannot be a theorist and pass this exam. You can't just know that SQL injection is a bad thing that happens to databases.
Right. You can't just define it.
Exactly. You have to know the specific syntax of the attack, the methodology of the injection, and the exact tool used to execute the exploit.
I keep thinking about this like a driving test.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Because you can sit in your room and memorize the DMV manual all day long. You can know the exact dimensions of a stop sign, the legal speed limit in a school zone.
But eventually, to get the license, you have to get in the actual car.
And parallel park the thing without hitting the curb.
And CompTIA forces you to parallel park through their performance-based questions, or PBQs.
The dreaded PBQs.
Yeah, these aren't multiple choice questions where you can just guess C and hope for the best. PBQs drop you into a simulated environment.
So, what does that look like?
Well, you might be staring at a virtual command line terminal or maybe a firewall configuration screen, and you are given a prompt to actually perform a task.
Like actually typing out commands?
Yes, like analyzing a live Nmap scan output to find a hidden server or configuring a tool to launch an attack.
Which means we really need to structure this deep dive, not like a textbook table of contents, but like the actual life cycle of a hack.
That's the best way to approach it.
Because if you want to think like a professional penetration tester, you don't start by just throwing exploits at a firewall.
No, you definitely don't. You start with the paperwork.
Right. Which brings us to Domain 1.
Exactly. Domain 1 is engagement management, because paperwork is what keeps you out of federal prison.
It's pretty important paperwork.
Very. And there's a golden rule here, the absolute unbreakable law of the pen test plus exam.
Which is?
No written permission equals do not test.
I love the analogy of being a vampire for this.
A vampire.
Yeah, you literally cannot enter the network unless you are explicitly invited in, and that invitation has to be in writing.
Oh, that's perfect, yes. A verbal, go ahead and test our servers from a CEO at a golf course means absolutely nothing.
It's legally worthless.
Exactly. If a scenario on the exam asks you what your next step should be, and you realize you do not have explicit written authorization for that specific action, the answer is always to stop.
Okay, so that authorization takes the form of scoping documents, right? Primarily the rules of engagement, or the ROE.
Yes. The ROE is the contract that outlines exactly what you can do.
So it sets the testing window, like maybe you are only allowed to hack them between midnight and 4 a.m. on Sunday so you don't disrupt the business.
Right, and it dictates the allowed methodologies. But the exam also tests what you cannot do.
And that falls into the exclusions document, right?
Yes, exclusions are the untouchable assets. So a client might say, hey, you can test the web servers, but under no circumstances are you to touch the legacy payroll server on this specific IP address.
And if you do...
If you send even a single ping to that excluded IP address, you have failed the engagement.
Wow.
Scope creep is a major failure point in the real world, and CompTIA tests it heavily.
Okay, let's play out a scenario here. You are doing everything right. You are inside the scope. You are following the ROE.
Okay.
But while you are digging through a compromised server, you stumble across a folder containing, I don't know, stolen credit card numbers, or maybe you accidentally crash a critical database.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, uh-oh. The study compilation lays out a very specific 4-step legal flow for forensics that you have to follow when an incident like that occurs.
Yes, and this is highly testable material. The 4-step sequence is rigid. You cannot mix it up.
Okay, what's step 1?
The very first step, always, is legal hold.
Now see, my instinct would be to immediately grab the data and back it up before it gets deleted or corrupted. Why is legal hold first?
Because if you just start copying data without establishing a formal legal hold, a defense attorney can argue that you tampered with the evidence.
Ah, so it ruins the chain of custody before it even starts.
Exactly. Legal hold is a formal legal directive issued to the organization to stop all normal data deletion policies. It is the paper shield that protects the integrity of the entire investigation.
Okay, that makes sense. So the paper shield is up.
Right. Once that paper shield is in place, you move to step 2. Data preservation.
Okay, so preservation is when we actually capture the evidence, like making bit-for-bit copies of hard drives, or literally putting physical servers into anti-static bags.
Yes, but just copying the data isn't enough. That brings us to step 3, which is data validation.
Meaning you have to prove the copy is exact.
You have to prove mathematically that the copy of the evidence you are looking at is identical to the original evidence and hasn't been altered by a single byte.
And we do that using cryptographic hashes, right? Like taking a digital fingerprint of the hard drive.
Precisely. You hash the original drive, you hash your forensic copy, and you prove the hashes match perfectly. This establishes the chain of custody.
Okay, so hold, preserve, validate.
And only after you have done those 3 do you move to step 4, which is data analysis.
So the memory hook for the exam is hold, preserve, validate, analyze. Do not mix up that order.
Do not mix it up.
All right, so the contracts are signed, the legalities are covered, and we are officially invited into the network. It's time to start casing the joint.
Yes, this is the transition into Domain 2, Reconnaissance and Enumeration.
Okay.
This phase is entirely about data gathering, and the exam expects you to understand the difference between testing environments.
Like white box versus black box.
Exactly. If a client gives you zero information, no network maps, no IP ranges, nothing but the name of the company, that is unknown environment testing or black box.
You are flying completely blind.
You are. You have to build the map of their network from scratch. And your primary map-making tool for the exam is Nmap.
Right, Nmap. The study materials are incredibly explicit about this.
Oh.
There are specific Nmap flags you absolutely must have memorized cold for the exam.
Oh, 100%.
Let's unpack them. The first one is Nmap dash lowercases capital dash SS.
Right, so the -SS flag initiates a stealth scan, which is also known as a SYN scan.
Okay, so why is it stealthy?
To understand that, we have to look at how computers normally connect over TCP. It's called the three-way handshake.
Right, SYN, the SYN, ACK, ACK.
Exactly. Computer A sends a SYN packet a synchronized request. Computer B replies with a SYN ACK acknowledging the request. Finally, computer A sends an ACK back, completing the handshake.
And once that three-way handshake is complete, a connection is established and the server logs the interaction. It knows you were there.
Precisely. So what a stealth scan does is break that process intentionally. It sends the initial SYN packet. The target server, thinking a legitimate connection is starting, replies with the SYN ACK, which reveals to the attacker that the port is open.
Okay, so you have the info you need.
Right. But instead of sending the final ACK to complete the connection, Nmap sends a RST packet, a reset. It tears the connection down before it's fully formed.
Oh. So because the handshake never actually completed, older or poorly configured firewalls won't even log the interaction.
Exactly. You found the open port, but you left no footprint.
That makes total sense. It's like you ring the doorbell, hear them walking to the door, and then you just run away before they open it.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Okay, so that's SAGSS. The next vital flag is NASSV.
The V stands for version detection.
Because finding an open port is only half the battle, right?
Exactly. If I know port 80 is open, I know it's running a web server. But I don't know if it's running an ancient, highly vulnerable version of Apache or, a fully patched modern version of Nginx.
So what does the SSV flag actually do?
It probes the open port, reads the banners returned by the software, and tells you exactly what software and what version is running.
And that is critical for finding the specific exploit you need later in the attack.
You can't exploit what you don't understand.
Makes sense. What about A? The A stands for aggressive, right?
Yes. Aggressive is the exact opposite of the stealth scan. It throws everything at the target.
Like what?
It runs version detection, operating system detection, script scanning, and traceroute all simultaneously. It is incredibly noisy.
So the firewalls are definitely going to see you.
Oh, they will light up like a Christmas tree. If a PBQ asks you to map a network without being detected by the security team and you use the A flag, you fail the question immediately.
Good to know. And the last major Nmap flag to memorize is P, just a lowercase p followed by a hyphen.
Right. So by default, Nmap only scans the top 1,000 most common ports to save time.
But there are way more ports than that, right?
There are 65,535 possible ports on a machine. And system administrators often try to hide services by running them on weird high-numbered ports, like running a web server on port 8042 instead of 80.
So the P flag forces Nmap to check all of them.
Every single one of those 65,000 ports. It takes much longer, but it ensures you don't miss a hidden backdoor.
Okay, so Nmap maps the physical ports on the machines. But we also need to understand the network's public footprint.
Right, the external attack surface.
And the exam tests tools like dig, specifically the command digaxfrdomain.com at DNS-server. Now, I know DNS is essentially the phone book of the internet, translating domain names into IP addresses. But what does that AXFR flag actually do?
That command attempts a DNS zone transfer.
What is a zone transfer?
In a properly configured environment, multiple DNS servers need to sync their records with each other so they all have the same phone book. A zone transfer is how they share that massive list of records.
But they should only share that list with other trusted servers, right? Not just anyone on the internet.
Exactly. But if an administrator misconfigures the DNS server to allow zone transfers to anyone who asks, that digax for our command will force the server to dump its entire internal address book straight to you.
Whoa!
Yeah, you instantly get a list of every subdomain, every internal mail server, and every hidden development environment they have registered. It's a devastating information leak.
That is a massive finding just from one single command.
It's usually game over for external recon.
Now, the cheat sheets also highlight a tool called the harvester, and the specific syntax to memorize is the harvester-d example.com-b Google.
Yes, this is for gathering human intelligence, or OSINT.
Open source intelligence.
Right. The harvester searches public sources, in this case using the -b Google flag to specify the Google search engine, and it scrapes the internet for any data associated with the target domain name.
So what kind of data is it pulling?
It will pull employee email addresses, names, subdomains, anything public. If you are preparing a spear phishing campaign for a later stage of the test, this is where you get your target list.
That's creepy but effective. And what if we are inside the network already and we encounter Windows machines? The tool to remember from the sources is Enum for Linux.
Enum for Linux is fantastic. It abuses legacy Windows protocols, specifically the Certer Message Block, or SMB.
How does it abuse it?
It attempts to establish a null session, which is an unauthenticated connection. If it's successful, it can pull down the entire list of users on the network, the password complexity policies, and the names of all the shared folders.
All without a password.
All without a password, just by asking nicely using an old protocol.
Okay, so we've mapped the network, we've pulled the user emails, we know what software is running on every port. We are moving from reconnaissance into domain 3. Vulnerability discovery and analysis.
We found the potential cracks in the armor.
Right. Now we have to figure out if those cracks are actually real.
And usually a penetration tester uses automated vulnerability scanners for this, like Nessus or OpenVAS, to analyze that network map.
But scanners are notoriously flawed, aren't they?
Extremely flawed. They generate massive amounts of output, and the exam heavily tests your ability to filter that output. You have to understand the detection accuracy matrix.
The matrix breaks down into 4 categories.
Right.
Let me take a swing at explaining the first 2.
Go for it.
First is a true positive. So the scanner alerts you to a critical vulnerability, and when you manually investigate, you find that the vulnerability is actually there. It's real.
Yeah.
Then you have the false positive. The scanner throws a massive red alert, but when you look closer, the scanner misread the version number, and the system is actually patched. So it's just a false alarm.
Exactly. Both of those scenarios require manual investigation, but neither of them is inherently dangerous to the tester.
Right.
The third category is a true negative. The scanner says the system is secure, and it is indeed secure. Boring, but good.
And the fourth category?
The fourth category is the one that destroys companies, the false negative.
Oh, man. So the scanner runs, gives you a green check mark, and says everything's perfectly secure. But in reality, there's a gaping hole in the firewall that the scanner just completely missed.
A false negative creates a false sense of security. You report to the client that they are safe when they are actively vulnerable.
That's the worst case scenario.
It is. And the exam will test your ability to prioritize these findings based on asset value.
What do you mean by asset value?
Well, if you have a true positive on a low-level marketing workstation and a true positive on the central database holding customer credit cards, you obviously prioritize the database. You have to align your technical findings with the actual business impact.
The business impact.
Yes.
Right. The sources also explicitly remind us not to get tunnel vision on the digital side. Domain 3 includes physical security testing, too.
Yes, Objective 3.3 specifically covers this. Because a penetration test isn't just about code, it's about testing the entire security posture of the organization.
So what are we talking about here? Breaking windows.
No, not breaking windows, but you need to understand concepts like tailgating.
Which is walking through a secure door right behind an authorized employee before the door closes, right? Hey, hold the door.
Exactly. The exam also covers badge cloning, using RFID writers, dropping malicious USB drives in the company parking lot to see if an employee plugs one in out of curiosity.
And even the mechanics of physical lockpicking.
Yes, lockpicking is testable.
Which brings us to the beast. Domain 4, attacks and exploits. This is 35% of the exam.
The main event.
This is where we stop scanning and start exploiting. But there are hundreds of attacks. How does someone memorize all of this without just drowning in information?
The strategy outlined in the study compilation is actually brilliant in its simplicity.
What is it?
You do not need to memorize the source code of every exploit. You need to memorize the trigger words.
Trigger words.
Yes. CompTIA uses very specific, repetitive phrasing in their questions to point you directly toward the correct attack.
Okay, let's run through the heavy hitters for web and application attacks then. First up, SQL injection, or SQI. What is the trigger word or phrase for that?
The primary trigger for SQL ingestion is seeing the actual syntax in a log file or a URL string. Specifically, single quote, space, or R1 equals 1, dash dash, or R1 equals 1.
Let's unpack that syntax because I see it everywhere in security courses. Why does that specific string break a database?
Imagine a website login form. The backend database query basically says, select this user, if the username matches, and D, the password matches.
Right, pretty standard.
But by injecting a single quote mark, the attacker closes the expected input field early. Then they add the logic, or R11.
And since the number 1 always equals the number 1, that statement evaluates to true.
Right, so the database query now reads, select this user, if the password matches, or if true.
Oh. And because the second half is universally true, the database just ignores the password requirement entirely and grants access.
Exactly. The 2 dashes at the end, those just tell the database to ignore the rest of the original query as a comment.
So it just comments out whatever security checks were left.
Yes. So if you see authentication bypass, unsanitized input, or that 1-1 logic in a question, you are dealing with SQL injection.
Okay, that makes it so much easier. Next are 2 that always seem to trip people up. CSRF versus SSRF, cross-site request forgery versus server-side request forgery.
Yeah, these are easily confused.
I've heard CSRF described using a bank vault analogy.
It's an excellent analogy. Let's walk through it. Imagine you log into your online banking portal. You essentially just open the door to your secure vault, and as long as your session is active, the bank trusts you.
Okay, I'm logged in.
Now, in another browser tab, you open a piece of junk mail that contains a hidden, tiny, automated script. Let's call it a robot.
A tiny robot in the junk mail.
Right. That robot jumps over to the banking tab, which is still open and authenticated, and it initiates a wire transfer.
And the bank allows the transfer because I am the one logged in, so it looks like I made the request.
Exactly. The robot forged a request from your browser. That is cross-site request forgery.
So what are the trigger words?
The trigger words for the exam are tricks a logged-in user's browser or exploits a trusted user session.
So how does that differ from SSRF, server-side request forgery?
Well, SSRF doesn't care about the user's browser at all. It targets the server itself.
How?
Many servers are configured to fetch data from other internal servers or from cloud metadata services. An attacker manipulates a vulnerability to force the server to make a request on the attacker's behalf.
So if the server's allowed behind the internal firewall, the attacker uses the server as a proxy to reach systems they couldn't access directly from the outside.
Precisely. They use the server to attack its own internal network. The trigger words for SSRF are forces the server to fetch user URL, access internal network, or interacting with cloud metadata services.
That distinction is incredibly clear. User browser is CSRF, server proxy is SSRF.
Exactly.
Let's look at another pair that gets confusing. LFI versus RFI. Local file inclusion versus remote file inclusion.
Okay, so LFI targets files that already exist locally on the server. The trigger here is path manipulation or directory traversal.
So you will seize syntax like // etc. / password.
Yes. The attacker is trying to break out of the web directory and navigate down into the server's core operating system files to steal passwords or configuration data.
So L is local. The file is already there. You're just looking for it. RFI, remote file inclusion, means the attacker is bringing their own malicious file to the party.
Right. The trigger for RFI is remote script execution or external file loading.
So they force the server to download it.
The attacker exploits an input field to force the server to reach out to an external, attacker-controlled IP address, download a malicious PHP script, and execute it locally.
Moving beyond web applications, the exam also dives into network-level threats, specifically identifying the behavior of an advanced persistent threat, or APT.
Yes. The trigger words for an APT are nation-state, long-term presence, highly funded, and data exfiltration over months.
So these are not your typical smash-and-grab ransomware operators.
No, not at all. APTs want to penetrate the network silently, establish a foothold, and siphon off intellectual property for years without ever being detected.
But if they're hiding deep in the network, how do they receive instructions from the hackers without triggering the firewall alarms? That brings us to beaconing, right?
Yes. Beaconing is how infected internal machines talk to external command and control servers, or C2 servers.
What are the triggers for that?
The trigger words are periodic outbound traffic every 30 seconds, or callback.
It's literally a heartbeat. The infected machine sends a tiny packet out to the internet saying, hey, I'm still here, what should I do next?
Yes, and sophisticated attackers use jitter.
Jitter.
Meaning they randomize the timing slightly so it isn't exactly every 30 seconds. It might be 28 seconds, then 35 seconds. This makes it much harder for automated defenses to spot the pattern.
That's clever.
They might even hide the beaconing traffic inside legitimate-looking DNS requests. But the core concept remains the same: regular, outbound, automated communication.
And once an APT is inside, they don't just stay on the receptionist's computer, they perform lateral movement. The trigger words here are pivot or pass the hash.
Passing the hash is a critical concept for this exam.
Let's break it down.
When you log into a Windows network, your password isn't sent across the network in plain text. It is passed through a mathematical algorithm to create a fixed-length string of characters called a hash, specifically an NTLM hash.
So if I intersect the traffic, I don't see the password 123. I just see a massive string of gibberish.
Right. But here is the vulnerability. In many older Windows environments, the server doesn't actually need your plain text password to authenticate you.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, it just needs that string of gibberish. It just needs the hash.
Oh.
So if an attacker compromises one machine, scrapes the hash out of the computer's memory, they can literally pass the hash to another server and log in as you.
Without ever actually knowing what your actual password is.
Exactly.
That is terrifying. Speaking of hashes, we have to talk about password attacks, specifically rainbow tables.
Okay, so to understand a rainbow table, we have to understand the math of hashing. A hash is a one-way function.
Meaning?
You can easily turn password 123 into a hash, but you cannot mathematically reverse the hash back into the word password 123.
So if I steal a database full of hacked passwords, I can't just run a program to decode them.
Right. So attackers came up with a brute force workaround. They took a massive dictionary of every word in the English language, every common password, every combination of numbers,
Okay.
and they ran them all through the hashing algorithm beforehand. They created a massive database, a rainbow table, that maps the plain text word to its resulting hash.
So when they steal the database, they don't try to crack the hash. They just look up the stolen hash in their pre-computed table, find the match, and look at the plain text word sitting right next to it.
Yes, they have the answers to the test before they even take it.
Wow. But the exam will test you on how to defeat this, right?
Yes. Algorithms like MD5, SHA-1, and NTLM are highly vulnerable to pre-computed tables. The defense against it is called salting.
Salting, like adding salt to food. What does it mean in cryptography?
Salting means adding random data to the password before you hash it.
Okay, give me an example.
If your password is password 123, the server generates a random string of characters. The salt, say, XYZ89.
Okay.
It attaches that to your password, making it password 123XYZ89, and hashes that specific combination. Then it stores both the salt and the resulting hash.
Oh, I see. Because the attacker's pre-computed rainbow table only calculated the hash for password 123, the new salted hash won't match anything in their database.
Exactly. The entire terabyte-sized rainbow table becomes mathematically useless against a salted password database.
That is exactly how you need to understand it for the exam, the mechanics behind the attack and the mechanics behind the defense.
Yes, you have to know both sides.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We have the blueprint, the legal scoping rules, the scanning fences, the true and false positive matrices, and we have decoded the trigger words for complex web and network attacks.
It's a lot of material.
It is. But knowing the theory of the attacks is really only half the battle. You have to know which weapon to pull out of the armory. This brings us to Section 4, the hacker's tool belt.
Right. And the sources use a fast category memory framework for this.
How does that work?
CompTIA will present you with a scenario and give you a multiple choice list of 4 tools. You have to be able to state the primary function of every tool on that list in a single sentence to quickly eliminate the distractors.
Let's run through the major categories to practice this. First is exploitation. The heavy hitter here is Metasploit. The memory hook from the study guide is Nessus scans Metasploit exploits.
That distinction is crucial. Nessus is a vulnerability scanner. It looks at a server and says, hey, it looks like the system is missing a patch. It might be vulnerable.
But it doesn't actually test it.
No. Metasploit is the exploitation framework used to validate that finding. You load a specific payload into Metasploit, point it at the server, and actually fire the exploit.
And if it works, and you get a reverse shell giving you control of the server, you have validated the vulnerability.
Yes. Scanners tell you a door is unlocked. Metasploit is how you open the door and walk inside.
Great way to put it. What about web application testing?
The dominant tool there is Burp Suite. Burp Suite operates as an intercept proxy.
What does that mean practically?
You configure your web browser to route all of its traffic through Burp Suite before it goes to the internet.
So you intercept the HTTP request, freeze it, modify the variables like maybe change the price of an item in a shopping cart from $100 to $1, and then forward the manipulated request to the server to see how it handles the bad data.
Exactly. That is manual interactive testing. But the exam also expects you to know automated web scanners, like Nikto. Nikto is a command line tool that fires thousands of checks against a web server, specifically looking for outdated server software, dangerous default files, and basic misconfigurations.
So it's fast but loud.
It is incredibly noisy but very thorough.
Now, I want to pivot to the defensive tools for a second. The study materials list tools like Splunk, SOR, Snort, and Suricata.
Right, the blue team tools.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge the premise here for a second. If I am training to be a penetration tester, an offensive red teamer whose job is to break in, why is CompTIA testing me on blue team defensive software?
That is a phenomenal question. And understanding the answer is the key to passing the scenario-based questions.
Okay, why?
A professional penetration test isn't just about finding a vulnerability. It's about testing the organization's ability to detect an attack.
Oh.
If you do not intimately understand how a defender monitors their network, you cannot possibly hope to evade them.
Right. You have to know exactly how the alarm system is wired if you want to bypass the motion sensors.
Precisely. You need to know that Splunk is a security information and event management system. Its primary job is log aggregation and correlation.
So it collects logs from every firewall, every server, and every router.
And it looks for the big picture patterns that indicate an attack is happening.
But the notes make a critical distinction here. Splunk analyzes the logs and sends an alert, but it does not automatically take action to stop the attack.
Right. For automated action, defenders use SR security orchestration, automation, and response. SR platforms ingest the alerts from Splunk and use pre-written playbooks to automate the incident response.
So if Splunk detects an impossible travel alert, meaning, a user logged in from New York and 5 minutes later logged in from China, so receives that alert and automatically triggers a playbook that disables the user's account and blocks the Chinese IP address at the firewall.
Exactly. The trigger words for SO are automated containment or trigger playbook.
So as an attacker, if you know a network is running a SAR platform, you know your attacks have to be low and slow to avoid triggering those automated lockdowns.
Yes. What about monitoring the actual network traffic as it flies across the wire?
That's where Snort and Suricata come into play, right?
Yes. They are intrusion detection systems, or IDS. They sit on the network and inspect packets, comparing them against a massive database of known malicious signature rules. They act as a network tripwire.
And Suricata can also operate as an IPS, an intrusion prevention system.
Right, meaning it can be placed in line and actively drop the malicious packets.
And if an analyst wants to dive deep into the raw data of a packet, they use Wireshark.
Yes. Wireshark performs deep packet inspection and protocol analysis, but it doesn't do automated alerting like Snort.
Good to remember.
Yeah.
We also have to cover malware analysis tools, because if you find a suspicious file during an engagement, you don't just run it on your own machine.
Definitely not. You use a sandbox.
The sources list Joe's Sandbox and Cuckoo.
These are isolated, automated virtual environments where you can execute the malware safely and observe its dynamic behavior.
So you watch what registry keys it tries to change and what IPs it tries to contact without risking your own infrastructure.
Exactly. Finally, we have to talk about the cloud. The PenTest plus PT0-003 has heavily integrated cloud technologies into the exam. The attack surface has moved way beyond on-premise servers.
The key tools here are Scout Suite, which is used for multi-cloud auditing and finding security misconfigurations across AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud.
Then there's Prowler, which specifically assesses an AWS environment's posture against industry best practices.
And then there's Pacu,
Yes, PACU is vital. PACU is to AWS what Metasploit is to a traditional network.
It's an exploitation framework.
Specifically designed to test cloud privilege escalation, IAM misconfigurations, and data exfiltration inside Amazon Web Services.
Knowing the tools is one thing, but how do we organize our thinking during a massive engagement? Because the exam tests three major analytical frameworks. The first is the cyber kill chain.
Right. Developed by Lockheed Martin, the cyber kill chain models an attack as a linear 7-stage progression.
It starts with reconnaissance, moves to weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and finally, actions on objectives.
And if a defender breaks the chain at any one of those steps, the attack fails. It is a very linear, sequential way of thinking.
Contrast that with the diamond model. The diamond model is analytical and nonlinear.
It maps an attack based on the relationships between 4 nodes: the adversary, the infrastructure they use, the capability or tool they deploy, and the victim.
And then there is the industry standard, ITIR, ATT, and CK.
This isn't just a theoretical model. It is a massive, continuously updated knowledge base of real-world adversary behavior.
It focuses heavily on tactics, the why an attacker is doing something, like trying to achieve persistence, and techniques, the how they're doing it, like creating a scheduled task in Windows.
Right. And when security teams share intelligence about these adversaries and their techniques, they use specific threat intel standards. You have to know the TRIO, CyBooks, STIX, and TAC2.
These are often confused, but they are very distinct components of intelligence sharing.
Let's use a real-world example to ground this. Imagine a major bank in New York gets hit by a brand new, highly sophisticated Russian banking Trojan.
Okay.
The bank's incident response team extracts the raw IP addresses the malware communicated with and the digital hashes of the malware files.
So those raw technical indicators of compromise, the IPs and the hashes, are the CyBots data.
Yes. CyBox is the standardized schema for representing cyber observables.
But just having a list of IPs isn't a report. The bank needs to wrap that data in context. They need to say who.
That pipeline is TAC2. TAC-TORS is the secure delivery mechanism, the transport protocol that routes the intelligence between organizations.
Data, language delivery. CyBox, STIX, TAC-DOs. If you understand how they interact, you will easily navigate the threat intel questions on the exam.
100%.
So we have covered the blueprint. We've navigated the strict legal rules of engagement. We've mapped the network with Nmap, decoded the trigger words for complex attacks like SQL injection and SSRF, and categorized the hacker's tool belt from Metasploit to PACU.
That's a ton of information.
It is. But the ultimate question remains, how does someone actually structure their life to absorb all of this and pass the test?
This brings us to Section 5. Flawless execution and the tactical passing strategy.
Let's get into it.
The ADHD-friendly schedule provided in the sources is designed to filter out the noise. It is ruthless about efficiency.
It's a 3-week, highly focused sprint, right?
Yes. Week 1 is entirely about building the foundational mindset. The schedule dictates reading the objectives line by line, mastering Domain 1, the engagement and legal scoping we discussed, and immediately building flashcards for the Nmap commands and the fast category tool definition.
So the schedule forces you to prioritize. You don't spend a week reading about the history of cryptography.
No. You focus on scooping, legal authorization, reconnaissance, Nmap flags, web attacks, privilege escalation, and reporting. Those are the high-yield topics that actually generate points on the exam.
The sources also provide a mental framework like an exam mindset to use when you are staring at a massive, confusing PBQ or a paragraph-long multiple-choice question designed to trick you.
Yeah, the questions can be very tricky.
So when you are stuck, you stop and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what phase of the penetration test am I in right now?
Right, because if the question states you are in the reconnaissance phase, you immediately eliminate any answer choices related to exploitation tools like Metasploit.
The second question is, what is the safest and most legally compliant next step?
This goes back to the golden rule. If you find a vulnerability outside of the scoping exclusions, the answer is never to exploit it. The answer is to report it.
And the third question, what tool specifically matches the technical task required?
Filtering every question through that 3-part mindset eliminates the distractors that CompTIA intentionally places in the answers.
The strategy also heavily emphasizes practice testing. They recommend using CertMancer or CyberVista practice exams.
But here is the critical directive. The goal isn't just to take the tests. The goal is to consistently score 90% or better in a simulated, timed 90-minute testing environment before you ever schedule the real exam.
That's a high bar.
It is. And for every single question you miss, you must read the what you need to know explanation. You are building muscle memory.
Because the exam is a marathon, and you have to train for the pacing.
Exactly. The sources even provide a final memory line to help sequence your actions during an engagement, particularly when it comes to Domain 5 and reporting.
Let's unpack that memory line. It goes check, align, find why, escalate, protect, explain risk, reprioritize, business impact, accept.
It is a workflow for handling a vulnerability finding. You check the finding to ensure it isn't a false positive. You align it with the scope to make sure you are allowed to test it.
Okay, check and align.
Then you find why it exists. Was it a missing patch or a misconfiguration? If it's a critical systemic issue, you escalate it to the client immediately. You recommend ways to protect against it.
You explain the risk in clear, non-technical terms to the stakeholders.
You reprioritize the finding based on the business impact. A vulnerability on a database is worse than one on a guest Wi-Fi network.
And finally, if the client decides the fix is too expensive, they accept the risk.
That workflow is the life cycle of a professional finding because ultimately the PenTest Plus isn't just about hacking. It is about identifying risk, communicating that risk, and helping a business secure their infrastructure.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Cramming for a complex $404 exam is an incredibly stressful experience.
It's exhausting.
It feels like you are trying to drink from a fire hose of syntax, acronyms, and theoretical frameworks. But what you are actually doing through this 3-week sprint is fundamentally rewiring your brain.
You really are.
You are adopting the precise, calculated mindset of a highly disciplined security professional. You are learning to see the matrix of network traffic, to respect the rigid legal boundaries that separate professionals from criminals, and to wield incredibly powerful tools with surgical precision.
That summarizes the journey perfectly. We started by mapping the blueprint of the 5 domains, identifying the massive 35% weight of attacks and exploits.
We established the ironclad necessity of the rules of engagement.
We decoded the attack trigger words, categorized the essential defensive and offensive tool belt, and laid out a tactical, highly focused study plan.
It is a comprehensive end-to-end battle plan.
But as you dive into your flashcards and your practice exams, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
What's that?
The PenTest Plus certification is a badge that proves you have the technical capability to break into highly secure systems. It proves you understand how to bypass firewalls, manipulate web forms, and exploit cloud misconfigurations.
Right.
But the real evolution of a cybersecurity professional isn't just learning how to break things. It is taking that profound offensive knowledge and using it to build an unhackable world.
We learn how the locks are picked so we can build better locks.
Exactly. As cloud environments expand wildly, tested by specialized frameworks like PACU, and as complex API-driven architectures become the standard, the global attack surface is growing exponentially.
Just getting bigger every day.
And the adversaries are getting smarter, faster, and better funded. So ask yourself,
Right.
as you memorize these tools and trigger words over the next 3 weeks, are you just learning to pass a standardized test? Or are you actively preparing to outsmart the next generation of threat actors?
It all loops back to the very beginning. We learn to break in methodically, safely, legally, and with absolute precision so that we can ensure nobody else ever can. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the CompTIA PenTest Plus blueprint. Build your flashcards, respect the scope, execute the strategy, and go crush that exam.